Hi, I'm Electric Ashes, and in this video I'm going to review Magical Girl Lyrical Nanoha the movie first, a retelling of the first season of the Nanoha anime. Now you may think it's strange that my first review would be something that wasn't made for the UK market. Honestly, the only thought I had when I was choosing something to review was, what's on my shelf? And the reason why I imported the movie rather than the original series that it was adapting was simply because the movie came with English subtitles. Let's get the review started. This is Nanoha Takamachi, just a normal grade schooler who had this strange dream. She dreamt that a mage and a monster were fighting each other at the lake, and after the mage was defeated he transformed into a ferret. Coincidentally, on the way home from school, Nanoha discovers the lake was in ruins, and after hearing voices in her head she finds an injured ferret. Nanoha and her friends take the ferret to a vet. Later that night she starts hearing voices again. This is Yuno's squire, and he needs help. The monster that simply ran off after defeating him last night suddenly decides that now it really wants to kill him. Nanoha is naturally confused about what's going on. Unfortunately, there is no time for a drawn-out explanation. Yuno simply asks her to fight the monster in his stead. And so, Nanoha takes the red orb, Raising Heart, and activates it, only to find that she needs to set up a new user profile. After all the update patches were installed, Nanoha could finally activate the transformation sequence. I just have to say, I love the redesign of Nanoha's costume. I feel that it better emphasizes the sci-fi elements of the franchise compared to the original. I also like that Raising Heart simply used the default options for the costume and staff, instead of having Nanoha come up with a design on the spot. Now, the first fight scene. Unlike Western media from the past decade, Nanoha doesn't instantly become the bestest ever, and then effortlessly destroy the monster. Instead, we have Raising Heart doing most of the work as Nanoha doesn't know how to do magic herself. She didn't even know that magic existed until now. The first minute of the fight was Nanoha dodging and hiding from the monster as she tries to figure out what she's even supposed to be doing. It's only when the monster goes after Yuno does Nanoha try to go on the offensive. On Raising Heart's guidance, Nanoha does a point-blank magic blast. This causes the monster to split in three, and then they run away. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like that Nanoha would be able to catch up to the monsters, so she asks Raising Heart if she can do ranged attacks. It then transforms into a magic cannon. Monsters destroyed, magic crystals sealed. Yuno then explains the plot over a montage of Nanoha bringing him to her house. Yuno was an archaeologist who found these crystals called jewel seeds, and he sent them to the Dimension Administration Bureau. Unfortunately, they got lost in transit, so now he has to find them before something bad happens. What he didn't know was that he wasn't the only one who was after the jewel seeds. This is Fate Testarossa, and she's collecting the jewel seeds for her mother. As for Fate's redesign, I think she looked better with the loincloth. I mean, the costume is fine in the movie itself, it's just when it comes to still images, I find the open slit in the right of her skirt to be distracting. I prefer the symmetry in the classic costume. Anyway, despite Yuno's warning, Nanoha goes rushing into the direction of magic flying everywhere. She manages to get on the monster's back and tries to seal the jewel seed. But like a Pokemon, the monster wasn't weakened enough and escapes, only for it to be intercepted by Fate. With the fight over, Nanoha tries to talk to Fate. Unfortunately, she isn't in the mood to talk, and so she kicks Nanoha's butt. Fate seals the jewel seed, making the current score 3-1 in Nanoha's favour. No, wait, make that 3-2. Fate's dog, Alf, found a jewel seed between scenes. Undeterred by that disaster, Nanoha decides that she's going to need training. This involves magic exercises at home and virtual training at school. These training scenes weren't in the original anime. Instead, there were 2 episodes after Nanoha first became a magical girl where she sealed away 5 jewel seeds before meeting Fate. In the show, Nanoha seemed to be learning through experience, something that the movie probably couldn't convey properly given how quickly it needs to go through events. Although, given the emphasis Raising Heart gave to battle tactics, I think these scenes were only included just to dismiss the notion of Nanoha being a blunt instrument. She does have a reputation of just brute forcing her way through her problems. The next jewel seed hunt wasn't going well for any of the parties involved, so Fate decides to shoot off some magic and force the jewel seed to activate. Which did make it easier to find, but it also meant that Nanoha could find it too. This doesn't seem to worry Fate much, not surprising given how their last fight ended. However, this fight turned out not to be as one-sided as the last one, as Nanoha was able to at least go toe-to-toe with her. Nanoha was almost even able to get Fate to actually talk things out. But Alf reminds Fate why they are there in the first place, and so Fate makes a beeline for the jewel seed. Nanoha gives chase to stop Fate. They struggle, and they end up breaking their devices. With no other means to seal it, Fate grabs the jewel seed with her own 2 hands. She does eventually stop the jewel seed from going out of control, but she knocks herself out in the process. Fate and Alf escapes, current score 3-all. Since neither side left the battle unscathed, and they can't really do anything until their devices are repaired, Fate and Alf goes home to report to Fate's mom. This is Precia Testuosa, a kind and loving mother. At least that's how Fate remembers her. These days she's more like the beatings will continue until morale improves. Once the girls finish recuperating, they immediately go back to hunting jewel seeds. But before they could fight again, the space cops show up. That forced jewel seed activation stunt Fate did the other night drew the attention of the Dimension Administration Bureau. Chrono demands to know what's going on here, and Alf responds by attacking him. With Chrono distracted, Fate manages to break free and makes a run for the jewel seed. But even behind a cloud of smoke, Chrono still manages to shoot her in the back. Fate escapes while Nanoha was brought to the DAB ship, the Arthur. She was taken to see Chrono's mother and the captain of the Arthur, Admiral Lindy Harlow. Lindy reiterates that the jewel seeds are dangerous artifacts, and because of that, the DAB will be taking over the jewel seed hunt. Later that night, Yuno calls the Arthur to offer his and Nanoha's help.
I welcome you to the ranks of Space Patrol! No one has ever actually volunteered to join us before. I have high hopes for your unprecedented justice!
So Nanoha and Yuno continue hunting the jewel seeds while Chrono tries to track down Fate, during which Fate is also finding jewel seeds. By the 10th day, the score is 8-6 in the DAB's favour. With the 7 remaining jewel seeds in the ocean, Fate decides to do the whole force activation routine again, because it worked out so well last time. Nanoha wants to go out there and help Fate, but Chrono tells her not to. The DAB's plan was to let Fate do all the work and then capture her after she was weakened. Nanoha doesn't like this plan, but can't do anything to stop it. Yuno, on the other hand, knows teleportation magic and helps Nanoha escape the Arthur. Alf wasn't too pleased by Nanoha's and Yuno's presence, but against 7 jewel seeds, Fate and Alf needed all the help they could get. Their combined might deactivates the 7 jewel seeds and all seems well. But Precia wasn't having any of this friendship crap and attacks both the Arthur and Fate. Alf tries to grab the jewel seeds in all the confusion, but was intercepted by Chrono and she only managed to get free. After that debacle, Nanoha and Yuno were reprimanded for disobeying orders, but they got off with a warning considering the potential disaster the jewel seeds would have caused if Fate couldn't stop them by herself. And given the amount of magic both Fate and Precia just used, it was unlikely that they were going to do anything for a while. So Nanoha was told to go home to recuperate. At the Testarossa household, after Fate spent some quality time with her mother, Alf goes to Precia to politely discuss her parenting methods. Precia responds by throwing Alf out of the house. She then tells Fate to bring her the rest of the jewel seeds. She doesn't explain how Fate was meant to get them. Is she actually expecting Fate to raid the Arthur? So Nanoha finds the injured Alf at one of her friend's house, and Alf was willing to talk in exchange for rescuing Fate. Although it turns out that she didn't actually know anything useful, such as where is Precia. Fortunately, Nanoha still wants to save Fate regardless. And so, at what looks like the abandoned flooded buildings district, Nanoha offers Fate one last fight. The winner gets all the jewel seeds. Now it might seem strange that the DAB would okay such a gamble, but the fight was pretty much irrelevant. Even if Nanoha loses, they can still follow Fate back to Precia. The first phase of the fight was pretty much standard at this point, with Nanoha on the defensive. Fate's fighting style gives her the advantage if she takes the initiative and prevents Nanoha from getting too far away. This wasn't a problem for Nanoha, in fact she planned for this. The second phase of the fight has Nanoha going on the offensive as she gives chase to Fate. All that this accomplishes though was that the fight just degrades to them racking their staffs together. Getting in close to Fate may seem like a strange strategy for a long-range specialist like Nanoha, but Fate doesn't seem capable of actually taking hits like Nanoha can. Fate could only evade and block for so long, and this fight was starting to take its toll. But Fate couldn't afford to lose here. She needed the jewel seeds so that things would go back to the way they used to be, before the accident, back when her mother called her Alicia for some reason. To end the fight, Fate seals Nanoha in place and bombards her with all the magic she could muster. Unfortunately for her, Nanoha was able to tank the entire thing. And so, Nanoha returns the favour by sealing Fate in place and shoots her with a massive laser. Much to Fate's relief, she managed to endure Nanoha's attack. But Nanoha wasn't done yet. You see, Nanoha's plan was to draw out the battle for as long as possible. Her Starlight Breaker attack makes use of all the excess magic that they were both throwing about, meaning it gets more powerful the longer the fight drags on. Against such power, Fate didn't have a chance. As she wasn't actually trying to kill Fate, Nanoha carries her unconscious body to safety. Precia wasn't too happy about the results of this fight, so she cast a powerful magical blast at Fate. Fortunately, this act of attempted murder allowed the DIB to find where Precia was hiding, and so the Testarossas were taken into custody. And in Precia's closet, the DIB finds a second fate. Except no, it wasn't a second fate. Precia seems to actually care about this girl. Now the truth was that Fate is a clone of Precia's daughter Alicia. Alicia died from a magical reactor explosion, and so Precia switched from researching magical energy to resurrecting the dead. Unfortunately, implanting Alicia's memories into a clone body didn't give the results that Precia wanted. What she created only looked like Alicia. This is the main reason why Precia hates Fate so much. Only now does Precia activate her defense systems as she prepares to go to Alhazard. It's basically Space Atlantis. She planned to use the Jewel Seeds to create a rift in reality, but with only 9 she also needs to overload the reactors to make up for the missing 12. We are then treated to a flashback, one where Precia complains about how Fate is identical to Alicia, and then immediately declares that they are completely different. I can only assume that this was a mistranslation. After all, the visuals show that this whole thing started because Fate was right-handed instead of left. The rest of the flashback was Precia coming up with the plan to resurrect Alicia. But Precia doesn't have much time because she was also dying. In the present, Nanoha and Yuno were dispatched to stop the reactor, while Chrono goes after Precia. Back at the Alpha, Fate was alone to contemplate her life as Alf left to help Nanoha and Yuno. Looking back on her life, Fate was forced to admit that her mother never loved her. However, it's not as if she was completely alone. Alf has always been by her side. Nanoha seems to be really insistent on being friends. And of course there's her device Bardiche. Just realised that I said that as if it meant something, despite the fact that this is the first time I mentioned Bardiche in this review. Thing is, while Nanoha and Fate do treat their devices as if they were people, Rising Heart and Bardiche haven't really displayed any sort of personality or independence, so it's hard to actually view them as characters. The original show at least demonstrated that Raising Heart was capable of acting without Nanoha's input. And I have to ask, why does Raising Heart and Bardiche speak English? In this anime, where even the aliens speak Japanese, they have the computer speak English, and I can't see the point in that. Anyway, with renewed conviction, Fate heads out to confront her mother. Which was fortunate because Team Nanoha's advance has stalled. Not that they had any trouble destroying the robots, it's just that there were so many of them and they kept on coming. But with Fate's arrival, the tide of battle was quickly turned, and with her and Nanoha's combined might, they could easily destroy even the most powerful of Precia's robots. During all of this, Lindy was stopping Precia from creating the spatial rift, while telepathically trying to explain to her that her plans were never going to work. Precia wasn't having any of that, however, convincing herself that Alhazard actually exists and it will have the answers she was looking for. Fate arrives and Precia tells her to piss off. Undeterred, Fate tells Precia that even if she doesn't consider Fate her daughter, she still considers Precia her mother, and despite everything, she does want to make her happy. Precia blows up the fortress and throws herself and Alicia into nothingness. Nanoha then breaks into the room to find Chrono, Fate, and Alf. I can only assume that Yuno already evacuated. Fortress destroyed, all officers safe, space rift closed. Now the only question left was what's going to happen to Fate and Alf. Well, being the key figures of this case, on account of Precia offing herself, they probably won't be acquitted, so the DIB are going to try and get them a suspended sentence. Oh, and Lindy is now their legal guardian. Before the trial begins, Nanoha was allowed to see Fate one more time. Fate asks how do we be friends. Nanoha replies with, "Say my name," although she doesn't sound that aggressive. They cry, they exchange ribbons, and the movie ends with everyone saying their goodbyes. I didn't notice this when I previously watched this movie, but when I took a closer look at it for this review, I was surprised Nanoha had such a reduced role in this story. I mean, I get it, they're trying to sum up a 5-hour anime in a 2-hour movie. I can understand cutting Nanoha's early battles in favour of skipping straight to Fate. But we also ended up skipping over how the whole secretly being a magical girl thing affected Nanoha's life and relationships. Take Nanoha's friend here. Based on the movie alone, she gets mad at Nanoha for not hanging out with her recently, and then she seems to just get over it. The original show, on the other hand, followed up this big blow-up with Nanoha's 2 friends talking to each other about it. And it's not as if they just kept it to themselves either. They do have a proper reconcile in episode 10. Obviously they couldn't omit this character entirely, since she was the one who saved Alf. But I don't see why they kept this plot point, since in the movie it didn't really go anywhere or add anything. Basically, the movie doesn't really have Nanoha contemplate the repercussion of her choices. Instead, we get much more focus on Fate, adapting storylines that were previously only in supplementary materials. Not that I'm saying that's a bad thing, However, this movie was framed as a flashback, with Nanoha as the narrator. There were plenty of time skips where we could reasonably infer that Nanoha learned about events that she wasn't actually present for, but the Precia flashbacks were something that she should have absolutely no knowledge of. There were only two people who actually knew about those events. One died before the movie began, and the other never discussed it with anyone before killing themselves. If the point of these flashbacks were to flesh out Precia as a character, then I think that was completely unnecessary. Fleshed out layered characters is a choice, not an objective upgrade. Let's be completely honest here. Precia functioned well enough as a flat hate-sync character. We would have been aware of her tragic backstory without the drawn-out flashbacks, and her last-minute epiphany was simply wasted on a character that got killed off anyway. Although, if we remember that Nanoha is the one telling this story, then the flashbacks might actually say more about her character than it does about Precia. That Nanoha felt that she had to put emphasis on the tragedy, because she otherwise couldn't conceive of anyone being as horrible as Precia was. Now let's talk about Fate, since she's effectively the main character. She's the one with the backstory, she's the one who has the character arc, hell, she's the one who actually confronts the villain at the end of the movie. As a character, she was obviously meant to act as a contrast to Nanoha. Nanoha chose to be a mage, Fate was born to be one. Nanoha has a loving family, Fate has an abusive mother. Nanoha is an extrovert, Fate is an introvert. Of course, you would have to watch both the anime and the movie to fully appreciate the contrast. Though I don't really understand Fate's devotion to her mother, I will say that it was better portrayed in the movie than in the original show. In the original show, we weren't really privy to what Fate actually sees in Precia. Not only were there signs of abuse before we were introduced to Precia, we also had Alf being quite vocal about their low opinion of her, even suggesting that they ditch her when the DAB gets involved. The only time we got a flashback of Precia being nice was at the beginning of episode 11. That was the episode that gave us the Alicia reveal. The movie omits the signs of abuse and gave us flashbacks of Precia being a good mother before we actually meet her, which turns her unstable personality into a pretty effective bait and switch. It's pretty clear that Fate was designed to evoke sympathy from the audience. Whether that actually works or not is going to be based entirely on how much the audience likes the character. That's the risk that tragic characters like Fate run. If the audience doesn't immediately take to them, then they will just view the character as corny or cringe. As for Fate specifically, I don't think there's much to hate about her, at least personality-wise. Sure, I question some of the decisions she makes, but she doesn't come off as stupid. So, would I recommend this movie? Well, I personally would be more likely to watch this over the original show, but honestly that's only because I actually own the movie. Thing is, this movie is more of a supplement to the original show rather than an alternative to it. But even if you were to start with the original anime, just bear in mind that it's not complex or subversive. I don't consider that a bad thing, but some people would. Anyway, thank you for watching. For my next review, we'll take a look at the Japanese education system.